Hi, everyone. This is the Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience and retention is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing with some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself from the stories my guests tell about the times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you to follow us on Twitter at Customer Fanatics. That's customer and then Fanatix. And also just follow me on LinkedIn at Heather Younger. That is because I'm in the process of writing a book based upon this podcast, which will have amazing stories of those on the show. And I'm going to be going a little deeper too, so you will not want to miss it. But I'll be putting out tidbits, asking for feedback related to the book cover and just ideas and colors. I want you to be a part of that. I want you to lend your voice to that. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at customerfanatics.com, and you'll get a couple freebies as well, including the first chapter to my book and some emotional intelligence tips as well. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully you enjoy this show. Hi, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and today I am super excited to be speaking with Greg Wathen. I'm so excited to have him on because I think it was last week, I was looking in my feed, and I saw a post by someone actually I don't know. Somehow it got to me because it had spread pretty big. And it was a picture of a gentleman pushing a stroller inside the workplace. And the post was basically from one of his team members. This gentleman happened to be the president and CEO of a company. And one of his team members had to attend some very important meetings. And so this gentleman decided to take care of the baby that was in that stroller while the other person, his team member, attended an important meeting. And that took me aback. And immediately I reached out to Greg. Of course, he is the gentleman that was doing that. And I just had to have him on the show. But I had to, because it just hit me. And I've never seen anything like that. And I don't know if it exists in big and large amounts around the world. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining the show.
Oh, thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here as well. But as you were talking about how it went viral, we are now at over 3.2 million views of that picture, which kind of surprised us because it's something that we incorporate in our daily lives in our workplace, of just as a team. And apparently, it struck a chord with a lot of individuals.
I just love it. I love it. I'm hoping more president CEOs of small, large, medium companies can take a little bit of lead from you on, again, doing what is humanly possible to connect and support our people inside the workplace. I love it.
Well, you would hope so, and you would certainly hope that people would do that very thing. But all too often we have a tendency to forget that even though you may be in a work environment, you're working with people, and the challenges of everyday people. Everybody is sort of, and I saw this quote recently. It says, everyone is fighting some kind of battle. And everyone really is. And so for us, what we try to do is sort of remove as many barriers as there would be in our workplace in order to sort of help everyone. And hopefully people saw that with the picture, and it certainly has surprised us.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Okay, so where are you, just to fill in those who are listening, where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Well, in terms of my leadership journey, I probably I wouldn't call it the end of my career, because it especially as we get older, but take it for me as my age. I will be 65 years old in July, and never thought I'd be where I am today. I head up a regional economic development organization in the portion of Southwest Indiana, which butts up to southeastern Illinois and northwest Kentucky. It's Evansville, Indiana is the primary community. It's the third largest city in the state of Indiana. And we're a regional economic and community development organization. And also never really thought I would be in economic development as I started my economic development career in Louisville, Kentucky, back in the mid 80s. I was really a marketer, and it sort of gravitated into this and have found myself in a really rewarding career.
That's amazing. That's it takes a certain type of person. And it's interesting because so when I think about what I know about that role as someone leading economic development, it requires quite a bit of politicking and a lot of the relationship building, but there are a lot of different topics that pop up, and sometimes you have to watch out how you speak. And at least that's what I've seen again in the past working in a local government and around the folks that are in those roles. But the thing that I find the most compelling is, when we come back to why I invited you on the show and seeing you, do what you were doing. You weren't expecting somebody to take a picture of you, but they did, and you're like, whatever, okay. But doing that, it just shows you as being so real and so human. And it would be, in my mind, the opposite of someone who has to do what at least I've seen people do in similar roles. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it is kind of interesting. I guess, especially it probably is not as simple as what people might think. Apparently a lot of folks, as we saw from across the world, actually, they gave us a lot of their stories, and but they find that sometimes it's a real challenge for them of being within the workplace, of dealing with the day in, day out kinds of challenges you have within the workplace. And for us, it's kind of one of those things. And so we are really focused on talent. How do we attract and how do we retain talent, whether you're in a corporate structure or you're working in a nonprofit structure or within a broader community. And for us, I think if you don't sort of walk the walk and talk, as they say, then I think we're missing something. And in particular, we see this as the kind of challenge that everybody faces on a day in, day out basis. And we want to try to alleviate any of those barriers as possible so that they can have a really rewarding life and balance sort of their life with work, with family, and with community.
Is that pretty much a standard thing where children are even allowed in the workplace like that?
We've had folks come in before. We have what I would call a seasoned team, because a lot of our team members, they have children a little bit older, but we have, and in fact, it's kind of one of those things where we had one of our team members at one time, obviously Audrey is, but another young mother, and it's kind of one of those where, and this was a few years ago, it got us really thinking about do we deal with that issue and really in a professional manner, but and having some dignity in that regard. So what we did, we took one of our offices here and we just sort of closed it off for when somebody wants to come in, and they used it as a birthing room from the standpoint of where they would go in and they could spend some time by themselves, being able to breastfeed and that kind of thing. And for us, it was something new. We hadn't really been a part of this, and especially being in a smaller company. But I will tell you, it pays dividends for you as a team member. But more importantly, I think it's something that's sort of the right thing to do. And then so to take it the other day when Audrey, she came in, and then we had a meeting with 16 other people. And understand the politics of it. We had some elected officials there. We also had some corporate officials there, and then ourselves. And Audrey said, "Hey, I was watching Baby Faye," and then also we brought her into the meeting, and she was marvelous. And I don't think we missed a beat in having the discussion that we had with the various constituencies that we had during that meeting, and no one said a word. I think part of it is that they don't always expect it, and they don't see it. And when you don't see it and when you don't expect it, you don't really know what to expect. And for us, we saw it as a normal meeting. We didn't really want to change what we were doing within that structure, but we were just trying to be accommodating. And I think that it worked out really well. We had a great meeting, and then people after the meeting too, they got a chance to see the baby. So that's always a nice thing.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I bet you that calms people down a little bit. It's hard to get super tense with a little baby in the room.
Absolutely. It changes sometimes I think it changes the tenor of having the discussion. And that's not to say that you probably couldn't do that in every time in every environment. But what you want to be able to do is be accommodating to those individuals, because things do come up, and it is kind of amazing. And the same thing, and we've probably heard as many comments from men as we have women of saying, we have challenges as well. And so I think part of it is just understanding from one another, from their perspective, and we don't do that as often as we should.
Love that. This is the empathy thing. This is putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. It's what you're talking about here, Greg, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of and it's a really simple thing to do. It took some time to sit down and think from that other person's perspective. Okay, that helps me understand what challenges that we need to try to address, to understand what they're going through, and then how do we address them moving forward. But until you ask the question, until you have the conversation, you really just never know.
So how many folks are in your organization?
Our organization is 8, so it's relatively small, but we work with large, like our board of directors is 70 plus people. Ooh. It's a large multi-county, so it's the largest board I've ever been around. And it's not uncommon for us to be in a meeting where we have 60 plus people in meetings. So it's a pretty collaborative process. But I will say this, we get a lot done. And we work with a lot of various constituencies, both from the corporate structure, from private and public companies, to working with municipalities, units of government, to working with nonprofit organizations. And we try to do that in a manner that really provides value to everyone. And not just have a meeting for the sake of having a meeting, but we're there. Because all of our meetings are, I wouldn't say they're scripted, but what we do, typically all of our, especially our morning meetings, they all start at 7:30 in the morning when we have those meetings, and then we try to have them no more than an hour. We do a lot of things, what we call team huddles with our team. Those meetings typically are no more than 30 minutes, and they're always standing meetings. And then we sit down and we sort of talk through a lot of different things in terms of these meetings. But we always do 3 things. We ask people, what are you doing? What challenges do you have? That kind of thing. How might we help you? And then we ask something totally out of the ordinary, such as, for example, one of the questions we had recently is that if you were stranded on an island and had all the essentials to survive, what would be the one extra thing that you would bring along? And what it does is it sort of gives you the process helps us focus, and sometimes we need to refocus on what is important. And for us, it just sort of helps us have a breather. So we try to do that within our structure and our meetings, and it works out really well for us.
So it's funny. I normally would ask, what your people say your leadership style is. I would venture to guess I know what the answer to that is. Given the it's a different kind of style. It's a different. I would say it's collaborative, but I learned this long ago, especially when I was in the corporate setting. We have very specific goals and objectives. We only have 2 goals for our organization as we go forward, and ours is building right now. For what we're doing in our organization is building the talent pipeline and boost fiscal well-being, and everything else is sort of superfluous. But how you get there, we have to recognize that each of us have a different set of skills. We have different styles. We have to respect those skills and styles. And as long as we're cognizant of here are our goals and objectives, how you get there, it doesn't really matter to us. You need to be respectful through that process. But our style is very, very simple from that standpoint. Is because we're a smaller organization. We have a lot of folks who are really significant self-starters. And then we have to rely on those individuals as a full team, because a lot of what we do is sort of distributed in terms of, because we have people working in multiple counties all the time. And so for us, it's focus on knowing full well, here are 2 goals, and what are we doing? Does it fit those 2 specific goals? And how you really get there, your own individual style may differ, and that's okay. You just have to respect that. We really don't want to be authoritarian. We really want to be more collaborative, understanding, though, that, we need to respect each other through the whole process. Mm. I love that. So I bet you they would just think of you as kind of a liberating manager. One again, because you don't have what often happens is in the workplace, usually in large organizations, but not always larger. Sometimes small companies, they feel kind of shackled by rules and procedures or lack of empowerment to do things. And so then most people aren't innovating and aren't achieving, and they're wondering why their bottom line looks the way it does. And it's often because they just lack in that empowering, liberating manager who's there. So it seems to me, based upon what you're talking about, that's who you are.
Well, it is very much liberating, and it allows individuals to put some of themselves into what they do. But also, and I think you would ask any of our team, what we do is really meaningful. It changes people's lives, and so for us, is to see something could be very small or something very significant. Some of the projects we work in, and seeing how it changed. At times, you can really pinpoint this did impact someone or impacted within a company or within the community. Those things really matter as we move forward, and we shouldn't forget we need to celebrate from that standpoint. For us, it's kind of a thing. It's with our new brand that we have through the region. It's called E is for Everyone. It's a brand that we've embraced within our region. Even though some folks think it's for Evansville, it really is. E is for everyone, is inclusion. And, it's all about connecting, it's contributing and celebrating. And we have a lot of times we forget about to celebrate the victories and kind of things. And one of the things we did, I don't talk a lot about some of these things, but we have a super person on our team, Sabrina, and she heads up all of our marketing, strategic communications. But Sabrina came from Nashville and met someone and came into our market, came from Nashville, but she came from the music business. So you think about somebody who came from different kinds of businesses. We have a lot of different kinds of skills and talent here. So Sabrina came to us and she goes, I've written a couple songs, and she wrote a song for, if you're familiar with Gilda's Club across the country, and we have a Gilda's Club of Evansville, and it's for cancer survivors. Well, she wrote a song, and then she worked with Gilda's Club, and she's a marvelous singer and musician, and she had a lot of connections in Nashville. So we said, hey, let's help her take that song to go to Nashville, and she recorded it. And it turned out so well that Gilda's Club has used this as their song. It's called "This Is My Day," and you can actually get online and go to iTunes and hear the song. It is a phenomenal song that Sabrina not only wrote but sings. And then we did another song that we thought, well, hey, we had a lot of success with this. And this is for the E is for Everyone song, and Sabrina wrote it and went back down to Nashville, recorded it, and we support her in that very thing. Because it's kind of one of those things where, yes, is that part of what she does in a marketing day-to-day? Probably not. But I guarantee you, having her get involved with something that she's so passionate in, it has changed her as an individual, and it has really helped us as a team and making our community better.
I want to give you kudos, that's for sure, because just everything you talk about, I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book called The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. And you pretty much have hit every single mark inside the book.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. You need to tell that to my kids because they don't always know what I do. So that's all right.
I think it's amazing. I mean, there are just so many people who don't get it. It's so intuitive. It's not rocket science, and you have to care. You have to care deeply for the people that are on your team. And I think this is obvious by your actions that you do. Like, these aren't just numbers or just employees, but these are friends and their family to a certain extent. And so you treat them as such. And guess what? I mean, it's going to be very unlikely these people will leave, unless, of course, it is to further expand their desire to pursue their passions that maybe might outside of work. If she were to, for some reason, get a recording contract or something, big,
absolutely.
You'd be happy.
And we would definitely. Oh, absolutely. We would definitely support that. I mean, it's, part of my background, and I don't talk a lot about it, but when I was 13 years old, I grew up in southern Indiana, about 60 miles away from where I am now, in a little town, and not a lot of diversity there. But I actually was in the seminary, Catholic seminary, and so in southern Indiana, you're on the Ohio River. In northern Indiana, near South Bend, up near Notre Dame, where the University of Notre Dame, there's a little community called Plymouth, and that's where our seminary was, the Catholic seminary. And so it was really a college preparatory school for those individuals who thought about going into the priesthood. And in 1968, my parents would drive me down to Little Evansville, Indiana think about this as 13. I get on the bus, and the Greyhound bus, take it up to Indianapolis, and then get another bus and go all the way up, which was about a 10 to 11 hour drive at that time, because you didn't have lots and lots of interstates in 1968, at least in Indiana. And then I lived there during the year, and I was with students, Latino kids from Los Angeles, African-American kids from Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland. And for someone who came from Southern Indiana, a small town, it changed my world. It changed my entire perspective of life, because you got to see people who were actually different from you, who thought differently from you. And it's carried me through my life and how I approach business, how I approach community, how I approach my family, is that we may not always agree, but it's important for us to hear and listen. And from that standpoint, and maybe we can get some common ground somewhere where we can try to change the world, or at least our parts of the world, wherever that might be.
Well, I can guarantee you've done that. I mean, as you can see by the over 3 million people, and I'm sure it's going to continue to go up, who are attracted to the nonverbal message of what the picture of what you were doing and what that represents, because it is so far few and far between. But you impacted people, other leaders, other people who were like, wow, maybe I'm slipping, maybe I'm slacking, maybe I need to step up to the plate to do more for my people, and not expect them to be able to juggle 5,000 plates in the air and still smile as we do it, right? So, I just think it's huge when we think about, impacting the world, impacting people around us. It's like, it starts with one. The change we're seeking starts with one. It starts with you. And obviously you have such a strong sense of self-leadership, starting back from those times when you were, in the seminary, which is just amazing. 13 years old. Wow. I have a 14-year-old. I have 4 children. But
you would never do that today, would you? Would you take out the thing? When I think about it, I said, Mom and Dad let me go on a bus for like 10 hours by myself to do that. I don't think that would ever happen.
Yeah, I'd be on eggshells if they went on a 40-minute bus ride. You know what I mean? Without me.
Well, and in today's world, I mean, and that's really kind of sad in some ways, because the world has changed so dramatically, where we can't think about family, we can't think about neighborhoods. But Jerry Abramson, who was the former mayor of Louisville, he had said something, and I was constantly reminded of when I spent 6 years in Louisville, was that, Louisville was a small enough petri dish that we could really have an impact on what the community looked like. And I think for us, as we look at it, especially with the various kinds of projects that we work on with our organization, we look at it a lot of times from neighborhood to broader community to region to state and nationally, so forth. But you can make significant changes within your neighborhood, within your community, that will be meaningful changes that will change someone's life. And I'm not just saying that. I see it happen all the time. And that's not to say that it's, I'm not trying to marginalize it, but for whatever reason, it's not that it's difficult to do because we sometimes don't know how to do it. But once you start that process down the road of trying to make some changes, and just simply by holding the door open for someone or saying good morning or just being nice or having a smile on your face, that could really change somebody's attitude as they move forward. And it really is something that we try to ingrain in what we do in our organization and with our community.
Okay, so now that we know that you are amazing, part of my show involves having you recall for us a time when maybe you weren't the most emotionally intelligent leader, where maybe you just weren't the person you are today, who's obviously a much more evolved person at 65, right? And so can you kind of recall a specific story or time in your leadership journey where you just weren't very proud of yourself? You just weren't the best version of you?
Oh, that happened. That could probably happen on a daily basis. You never really know on that. But, I was thinking about that, and we've had a couple of times over the years where I've had to make some difficult decisions and asking someone to leave our organization. And sometimes it wasn't the right fit. Wasn't the right fit for them. It certainly wasn't the right fit for us. And it kind of one of those things where it could have an impact upon your broader organization or company. And I was thinking about that in particular of one person, and it's how you go about and doing it. Now, obviously, when you have to go in and you have to tell somebody, "I'm sorry, but this is not working out. You have to leave." That is probably one of the worst things that you ever have to ask anyone. Is that because they probably think in their own mind that it was working out incredibly well. But a lot of times what you do is you start having that conversation with them, and sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. But it's kind of one of those things. I think over time, when you have to make those difficult decisions, I've changed how I approach those decisions and how I deal with it, because it's also a point as you're having that discussion with someone. In particular, you have to really be listening at that point to hear what they have to say, especially if you're doing it one-on-one, face-to-face, looking at their body language, seeing how they're reacting. Because in today's world, you could see certain kinds of negative reactions, and we see it played out across the country, in particular where you might see workplace violence and that kind of thing. For me, I think I've seen some of these events in the past where they haven't gone well, and I probably haven't done as good a job as I could have. I'm much more cognizant of the fact that as we move forward, we have to be sensitive to all of this. That's not to say that decision is going to change, because you have to be able to and be willing to make tough decisions, but it's how you do it to make sure that it's done with respect, at the same time that it's done with effect, and that you can help that person as they move forward become a better person. Because it's tough sometimes when somebody says, it's a feeling as if you think that you really don't want me to be a part of the team. Yeah, but you're not really working. How can we help you get better, but possibly somewhere else? I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It does, but I am wondering if you could go in, if you have the ability to recall, like the day that particular incident happened and kind of how you approached it then, and now I hear how you would change it, or be more empathetic now. You'd be definitely more emotionally intelligent now. But what did you do that was the opposite of that then?
Well, in this particular, the one, because this has happened over my career, where you have a couple of these. In this particular one, I remember there was an issue that arose. They had done something that had a very significant financial impact upon our organization. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why they did it. And to this day, I still don't understand why they did it. But, I probably got a little more short than I should have, because it had a real serious financial impact. So I remember at that very time, I took a step back and then actually said, before we make a final decision, because I was pretty angry at the moment, let's take a day. And we took a day, thought about it, looked at all the ramifications of the decision, still made the same decision, but came back and treated the person and treated the process slightly different from that point going forward. So I sort of made, in that particular case, more of a course correction. It took me a day to do it, because I was pretty upset. And I don't really get angry per se. That day I was probably more upset than normal, simply because it was, for a small organization, it was a lot of money. I think it was about a $90,000 impact on our bottom line. And it was kind of one of those things where you're sitting there thinking, and for the life of me, I was just questioning, why would you go ahead and make that decision? Well, one, you didn't have the capability of doing it, but you went ahead and did it anyway. And you had an impact not only on your organization, that impacted other individuals. And so it's kind of one of those things where you sit back, and I probably could have been maybe a little more sensitive at that point in time, or been because I was trying to put out a fire or multiple fires at that moment, because there were some implications from that decision that was made that we had to deal with it. And one of those implications, unfortunately, was because we had a contractual relationship with a company. Basically, they said, we won't be with you if that person's still here. So we had to make a conscious decision at that point in time. And, I think if I had to go back and think about it, I probably could have gone back and maybe treated it in a different manner, both with the company as well as the individual, and seeing how could we have made that work. And I'm not saying we could have, but we probably could maybe everyone felt better about it. Now, the company felt really good about it because I made a quick decision ultimately, but the person did not. And I think back often, is there something we could have done to make both of them happy? and a lot of times you can't. But that would probably be the closest decision that I can recall.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate that because, I'm sure you can imagine, someone who's listening in, they're either a new manager or a manager who's been around for a while, but might be struggling in their leadership in one way, shape, or form. And so they listen to you, which, again, it's an amazing story. And it's one I think that should be replicated. But you are an evolved leader. Like you said, you're not done, but you're kind of towards that end of the formal leadership journey. And you'll probably be leading for the rest of your life, right? You'll be leading some way, shape, or form, your family, your community, that'll be happening. But sometimes it's just hard to see yourself in the stories when people are just so amazing. And so it's good from my perspective, I like to step back and to show that even someone like you, even if it was just one time in your life, had a time where you weren't so perfect. And what you did to come out of that, because all of us face that. We face those situations all the time. And leadership is absolutely a journey. It's not a destination. It's an evolution. And you just start to, wow, look at me 10 years from now. Look at 10 years from before. And then 10 years before that. Absolutely. 30 years ago, I could have never done these things, And so I think it gives people hope that there's.
30 years ago, I would have had a full head of hair too. So
yeah,
I probably had a lot more hair 30 years ago. I had a different hairstyle. I think for those leaders who are struggling a bit in some of these areas, you need to stay focused, but you don't need to become obsessed. And there is a distinction. I think sometimes people become very obsessed of doing the right thing. I think you need to stay focused from that standpoint. I mean, here's one, and you being a lawyer yourself, is that there were legal ramifications of what was occurring there. And we had to be cognizant of that fact, but at the same time, there are human beings that we have to deal with. And it could go a lot of different ways for that individual, where they could have gone down a much darker path, or they could have bounced back from it saying, okay, I'm going to become a better person from this. And as a leader, that's the challenge. You're in leadership positions. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, and they're not always easy, but you try to make the best decision at the time, given the right amount of the information you're given at the time. And then a lot of times there's nothing wrong to going back and catching your breath and saying, did I make the right decision? And then not that you're second guessing yourself, but just making sure that you had clear thought as you move forward.
I think this is great. I love this idea of, stay focused. Don't be obsessed. It is a journey. We're going to make mistakes. We can course correct as you did. It doesn't have to take forever to course correct. We can do that at one step at a time. And we can also evaluate, as you did, whether the decision that we made in the course correction was one that is sound for the future, and commit whether we're going to do that again or not. So I just think it's an evaluative process, and you thankfully took us through some of that. And so I think that might help someone, hopefully, that's listening in. I know it's going to help me when I'm standing at a crossroads, either with clients or with something with my kids. It's just what decisions am I making, and were those valid, and can I make a change in that? So I appreciate you doing that. I'm hoping that for those who are listening, you received great value in listening to Greg, and you'll be able to go ahead and check out the original post as well on my website, and you just aren't going to believe it. So I definitely appreciate you, Greg. This has been really helpful.
Oh, thank you very much, Heather. What a great opportunity. As I said, we've had so many people reach out from that posting. I mean, think about the posting itself. It was just a picture with. Now, Audrey just did she did some marvelous commentary on LinkedIn, and it's just. But I think it has represented to so many individuals around the world, and so much so that we've seen 3.2 million views of it. Obviously, there's something lacking out there in the world at this point in time, and people are searching for it. But you can course correct. I'm a firm believer in it. We do it all the time in our work here. Is that you can make corrections, you can make changes, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Just understand that you need to learn from your mistakes and not do the same thing over and over again. Love it.
A great way to wrap up this talk, and it's been amazing. I definitely appreciate it. So if you've really enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to share it with others, be sure to do that. And don't forget too, that in order for more people to see it, the sharing is necessary, and also rating it and reviewing it where you're listening, whether it's on Apple Podcast or Spotify, where it's over on 25 different platforms. So you have lots of opportunities to rate and review it. And then the algorithm pushes this up at the top because there's quite a few leadership podcasts. I'm not sure there are ones where they're with live leaders talking about the times where they, how wonderful they are, but also about times where maybe they weren't the best of the leader that they'd hoped to be. So thank you for joining the Leadership with Heart podcast. And thank you so much, Greg, again.
You're welcome. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.